Right, so welcome to block 5. So this is a slight change in programming now. So we've gone through, your day 1, your strict presses, your day 2, your deadlifts, your day 3, your press assistance, and day 4, your squat and move. And we're now going to start to introduce some of the events. So it's now going to demands on your system, on both your muscles, your tendons, and all those various other structures that are loaded when we're training, are going to be asked a bit more of. So from this point forwards, I'm going to introduce a little bit of I suppose you call it a pulse raiser, before we actually start to do the mobility and the activation work. So for each sort of session, your log, your deadlift, your overhead assistance work, and your squats, I'm going to just talk through at the start of each video about just warming things up. So some general movements, trying to replicate the types of movements you're going to perform in the session itself, and that's just going to help to get some blood flow around, improve the effectiveness of the mobility work and the activation work, and you'll find that will just make things a lot more smooth as you transition into your actual lifts. Now, the other thing I'm going to talk about today is recovery. Now, one of the things you'll find as you're getting now into the sort of, the 5th block of training, is that recovery becomes even more important than it was way back when. Now, in terms of recovery, things that I'd like you to try and implement into your day-to-day programming would be a daily walk, a 30-minute daily walk. That can be done first in the morning, it can be done fasted, it can be done after breakfast, it can be done over an evening time. But I want you to simply just get out, no kind of intensity, just literally putting one foot in front of the other one, and that's just going to really help just to loosen things off. It'll help to improve a little bit of cardiovascular fitness, and it'll help to eliminate some of the waste products you've built up from training. So that's the main priority. The other thing I tend to use, and I'm going to give you 2 options here. Either some kind of cold water immersion, so you could set yourself up once or twice a week and get your bath filled, a couple of bags of ice in there, and you can spend between 2 and 5 minutes in an ice bath. This is best done on your days where you're not training, because the ice does have an effect if it's post-training on the adaptive responses that you get following a training session. So it tends to blunt the inflammatory response, which then has an effect in terms of strength and possibly hypertrophy. So on your days off, either an ice bath, between 2 and 5 minutes in the bath, trust me, 5 minutes will be plenty long enough, or an Epsom salt bath, again, same sort of situation. Now, cold and heat produce either cold shock proteins or heat shock proteins, and these have a natural anti-inflammatory effect. They also help to reduce pain sensation, and they produce a happy hormone. So they produce something called norepinephrine, which makes you feel good. So in conjunction with all the movement prep we're going to go through in a minute, I'd like you to also think about maximising recovery with your 30-minute daily walk. This is done every day, maybe have one day off over the weekend, but this is going to be something you're going to use consistently now from this point forwards. And either an Epsom salt bath once or twice a week. You can buy these big kilo bags of Epsom salts from the supermarket, chuck one of those into the bath, whole bag, a whole kilo of Epsom salts, and then spend 20 minutes in there. Or you're going to use your ice bath, which needs to be below 5 degrees centigrade. That probably needs some ice in there to bring it down below sort of normal water temperature, and you're going to do that once or twice a week, again on rest days. Right, so welcome to day 1. Today is your log day. Now, because we are 5 weeks in, and previously what we've done is just the mobility and activation work, what I'm going to introduce you to now is a little bit of a pulse raiser. So get your heart rate up, get your blood circulating around your system, so that you're priming yourself before you move into your actual mobility and activation work. A, you'll find it will feel more comfortable when you move into mobility and activation, and B, it extends the warmth a little bit longer, which means that when you get into your log or any of the other movements on this particular day, you're going to find that you're primed, ready, and we're helping to reduce the risk of injuries. Now, just a nice light resistance band. The thing with like these warm-ups is not to fatigue yourself. So if we're starting off thinking about our quads, we're doing a static lunge. Before you get to the point where you start to feel fatigue in your quads, you'll stop at that point. So that's your first movement. Then we might be moving into something like a wide base squat. So we're just opening ourselves up through the hips. Again, enough reps that you can feel your muscles working, but not enough reps that you start to induce fatigue. Then we might be thinking about moving into some kind of row. So onto the band and working through from there. Get those scapular muscles working. So again, a few reps on that. And this is all done as a circuit. So once you've got your basic premise down, you're then just moving from one exercise to the next. Just getting yourself a little bit out of breath, feeling some warmth through those muscle areas, those groups you're going to work. And that's the first 5 minutes taken care of. Right, so by now you should be out of breath. I've stopped breathing quite as heavy as I was going through that little bit of talking. Talking and doing stuff just doesn't work very well. So we're now moving into our mobility work, starting at the ankle, then into the hips, and then we're going to move up the chain so that by the time you finish these movements, you're primed, you're ready to go, and you're ready to move into the warm-up for your log. Now, a lot of these movements, and there's a big debate going on at the moment about, is stretching effective? And well, weighted stretches, if any of you have heard of Dante Trudel, this is a DC training, it's a bodybuilding type thing, I think predominantly more than it is strongman. So DC advocates intraset stretching, and this is weighted, so you tend to find that we're using weights to increase the effectiveness of this. Now ideally, you don't want to be doing weighted stretches intraset while you're training, the session that you're going to do today. However, as part of your warm-up, because we're going to oscillate in and out of positions, some weights to increase the effectiveness of the movement is going to be quite useful. So 20 kilo plate on your knee, so this is going to put some pressure down, and then all we're going to do is simply rock forwards and back. Each time we're going forwards, we're going to try and think about increasing the range of movement we're moving forwards into. So you might start feeling pretty stiff, your ankle joints feel stiff, your calves feel tight, the front of your shins feel stiff. And as you do a few repetitions on this, it starts to ease up until you get to the point where you think, okay, that feels like I'm working through a full range of movement. Now you wouldn't need much more than a 20 kilo plate. Don't start stacking plates on top of your knee because you've got very, very tight ankles. Go back to some of the stuff we've talked about in previous videos, in previous blocks of training, some of the banded stuff, and add those things in as part of the same movement prep. Maybe do them outside of the sessions. So on Wednesday, which is typically like your recovery rehab day, add some of those things in there. And if you're still struggling, then try and make sure that you're spending some time each day working on those specific body parts that you're struggling with. So 30 seconds on your right leg, 30 seconds on your left leg, and that's piece number 1. Right, so piece number 2, this is all about opening up the hips, open up the lower back, and trying to make sure that we are warm and mobilised before we move into anything where we're pressing overhead. So 4-point kneeling position, we're going to separate our knees though, so rather than being hips over the knees, we're going to have the knees outside of the hips, feet turned into what we call an externally rotated position, so the insides of your feet onto the floor or as close as you can get them, and then we're going to rock backwards and then rock forwards. So rock backwards and then forwards. Same rules apply. First few times you do this, your hips will probably feel pretty horrible, and all we're going to do is literally just encourage, coerce our hips into increasing range of movement. On this one, I wouldn't necessarily specify a time limit on this. I'd work until you feel like you've got ample mobility to be able to get into position. So ideally, around about 30 seconds, but if you find this a useful exercise, you can extend that up to as much as 60 seconds, as long as you're oscillating forwards and backwards, you're not just holding the stretch. So that's piece number 2, that's your hip opener. Right, so we're now moving on to your thoracic spine, which obviously plays a big part in terms of your shoulder blade position and your ability to be able to get into your overhead. And this is your thoracic opener and your lat stretch. And if you are struggling to get into an overhead position to keep your forearms vertical, it's probably because you've got tight lats. So you're going to kill 2 birds with 1 stone with this one. and we're going to use this as our mainstay of our thoracic mobilisation. I'm choosing this because of all the ones that we've done before, I think this is the most effective. If, however, you find that there's other things that we've done that you prefer to do, then by all means, drop those in at this point in time. So, bringing the elbows into the insides of your shoulders, so you've got a fairly narrow arm position. So we're not outside, because that takes a lot of the stretch off the lats. Bringing our elbows in together, gripping onto the stick, so try and take your hands wider than your elbows. Take yourself back, and then as you come back into position, you should feel a nice stretch through the middle of your back and through your lats. Now it really isn't about how far your hands come back over your head that makes this effective, it's how much you sink into that stretch position. So again on this one, rather than doing sort of reps, I'm going to encourage you to do a minimum of 30 seconds, oscillating forwards and backwards. But if you're finding that you're still getting something out of the exercise, at the end of that 30 seconds, keep going up to about 60 seconds. So now we're starting to freestyle a little bit based on what you feel you need and what you feel is working effectively for you. So that's piece number 3. That's your thoracic opener and your lat stretch, and that's going to help with it from an overhead position perspective. Right, so your final piece, we're now going to introduce some isometric holds in a 4-point kneeling position. Now, isometrics, we've talked about these in the tendon toolbox. They're a good way to reduce pain in tendons, but what we're going to try and do here is actually create some stability through your thoracic spine. Now, if you are getting sort of thoracic spine pain, it's because 9 times out of 10, where if you imagine you've got a bra on, your bra strap region, which is about T7, that's the keystone. If your back was a stone bridge, back in the days where they used to make bridges out of stone, the centre stone, the thing that holds the left and right side up, is called the keystone. T7 is the keystone of your thoracic spine. So when you're going back into extension to press your log above your head, that's where a lot of your movement comes from. So consequently, you find that joint becomes overused, it gets a little bit loose, and you find that you can get these horrible facet locks, which is when you get that horrible pain in your back. Hurts when you breathe, hurts like it radiates all the way from the front to the back. And this is going to help to stabilise that T7 junction area, that keystone of your back. So 4-point kneeling, hands underneath your shoulders, hips underneath your knees or over your knees. And then we're going to come up into a position where we're resting on the toes and resting on the hands. So if you want to move around, Dan, for us. And then move back to the front for me. Now, in this position, I want you to fire up your scapulars. So what we're going to do is keeping the hands in the same position. If you watch my elbows, I'm going to turn my elbow pits forwards. So I'll show you again. So you're rotating your upper arms, and the elbow pits, these things here, should face forwards. So back into position, elbow pits forwards, and we're going to camp out here for 30 seconds. So it's a static hold. You'll be shaking like a shitting dog at the end of it, and you're going to do 2 sets of 30 seconds before we then go into your actual log.